Hello, it is me, Luke, again, back for reading Chapter 2. It's not like I was looking for trouble. I didn't have to. At my height, it just always found me. My name is Michael Vey, and the story I'm about to tell you is strange, very strange. It is my story. If you passed me walking home from school, you probably wouldn't even notice me. That's because I'm just a kid like you. I go to school like you, I get bullied like you. Unlike you, I live in Idaho. Don't ask me what state Idaho is in. Newsflash, Idaho is a state. The fact that most people don't know where Idaho is exactly why my mother and I moved here. So people wouldn't find us. But that's part of my story. Besides living in Idaho, I'm different from you in other ways. For one, I have Tourette's syndrome. You probably know less about Tourette's syndrome than you do Idaho. Usually when people see someone on TV pretending to have Tourette's syndrome, they're shouting swear words or barking like a dog. Most of us with Tourette's don't do that. I mostly just blink my eyes a lot, or if I'm really anxious, I'll also clear my throat or make gulping noises. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes kids make fun of me. It's no picnic having Tourette's, but there are worse things that can happen to you, like having your dad die of a heart attack when you're 8. Believe me, that's much worse. I'm still not over that. Maybe I never will be. There's something else you don't know about me. It's my secret, something that scares people more than you would believe. That secret is the reason we moved to Idaho in the first place. But then again, that's part of my story. So I might as well tell it to you. Chapter 3, The Armpit. Mr. Dahlstrom's office is as good a place to begin as any, or as bad as a place. Mr. Dahlstrom is the principal of Meridian High School, where I go to school. If you ask me, 9th grade is the armpit of life, and there I was in the very stinkiest part of that armpit, the principal's office. I was sitting in Mr. Dahlstrom's office blinking like crazy. You could guess that I'm not very fond of Dahlstrom, which would be stating the obvious, like saying breathing is important or Rice Krispie squares are the greatest food ever invented. No one at Meridian was fond of Mr. Dahlstrom except Miss Duncan, who directed the Glee Club. She had a picture of Mr. Dahlstrom on her desk, which she sometimes stared at with soft, googly eyes. Every time Mr. Dahlstrom came over the PA system, she would furiously whack her baton on the music stand to quiet us. Then after he'd said his piece, she would get all red-faced and sweaty, remind us just how lucky we were to be led through the treacherous wilderness of high school by such a manly and steadfast defender of public education. Mr. Dahlstrom is bald, thin scarecrow of a man, with a poochy stomach. Think of a pregnant Abraham Lincoln with no beard and a yellow toupee instead of a top hat, and you get the picture. He also looks like he's 100 years old, at least. When I was in 5th grade, our teacher told us that the easiest way to remember the difference between principal and underlying law or ethic, and principal, the chief administrator of a school, is that the principal is your pal. Believe me, Mr. Dahlstrom did not put the pal in principal. It took a second. It was the second time that month I'd been called to his office for something someone else had did to me. Mr. Dahlstrom was big on punishing the victim. I believe this is the second time you've been in my office this month, Mr. Dahlstrom said to me, his eyes half closed. Is that right, Mr. Vey? That was the other thing about Mr. Dahlstrom. He liked to ask questions that he already knew the answer to. I was never sure if I was supposed to answer him or not. I mean, he knew the answer, and I knew the answer, so what was the point? Bottom line, it was the second time I'd been locked in my locker by Jack Vrains and his friends that month. This time, they put me upside down and I nearly passed out before the custodian unlocked my locker and dragged me down to Mr. Dahlstrom's office. Jack Vrains was like 17 and still in 9th grade. He'd been held back so many times, he had a driver's license, a car, and a mustache. And a tattoo. He sometimes called himself Jackal, which is a pretty accurate description since both he and the animal prey on smaller mammals. Jack had biceps the size of ripe floral oranges and wasn't afraid to use them. Actually, he loved to use them. He and his gang, Mitchell and Wade, watched Ultimate Fighting, and Jack took Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons at a gym not far from the school. His dream in life was to fight in the octagon where he could pound people and get paid for it. Is that right, Mr. Dahlstrom? Is that right? Dahlstrom repeated, still staring at me. I ticked almost a dozen times, then said, but sir, it wasn't my fault. They shoved me inside my locker upside down. He wasn't looking very moved by my plight, so I continued. There were 3 of them, and they were a lot bigger than me. A lot bigger. My hope for something was met with Mr. Dahlstrom's infamous stare death. Really, you'd have to see it to understand it. Last quarter, when we were studying Greek mythology and we got the part about Medusa, a Gorgon woman who could turn people into stone by looking into their eyes, I figured out where Mr. Dahlstrom had come from. Maybe it was something to do with my Tourette's, but I blurted out, that must be Mr. Dahlstrom's great-great-great-great-grandmother. Everyone had laughed, except for Mr. Dahlstrom, who had picked that precise moment to slip into our class. I spent a week in after-school detention, which wasn't all bad because at least I was safe from Jack and his posse, who somehow never got sent to detention no matter how many kids they stuffed into the lunchroom garbage cans or locked in their lockers. Anyway, that had officially put me on Mr. Dahlstrom's troublemaker list. Mr. Vey, you cannot be stuffed into a locker without your consent, Mr. Dahlstrom said. Mr. Dahlstrom said, which may be the dumbest thing ever in a school. You should have resisted. That's like blaming someone who was struck by lightning for getting in the way. But I tried, sir. Obviously not hard enough. Took out a pen. Who are these boys who allegedly stuffed you into your locker? Mr. Dahlstrom cocked his head to one side, his pen wagging impatiently in front of him. I stared at the pen in its hypnotic trajectory. I'm waiting, Mr. Beatty, their names. There was no way I was going to tell them. First, he already knew who had done it. Everyone knew that Jack had put more kids than textbooks into lockers. Second, ratting out Jack was the shortest route to death. I just looked at Mr. Dahlstrom, my eyes blinking like crazy. Stop twitching and answer my question. I can't tell you, I finally said. Can't or won't? Pick one, I thought. I forgot who did it. Mr. Dahlstrom continued staring at me through those half-closed eyes of his. Did you now? He stopped, wagging his pen and set it on the desk. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Bay. Now you have to take their punishment as well. 4 weeks in after-school detention. I believe you were in detention as hell. Yes, sir. It's in the lunchroom. Good. Then you'll have no trouble finding your way there. Like I said, Mr. Dahlstrom excelled at punishing the victim. He signed a tardy excuse note and handed it to me. Give that to your teacher, and go back to your class now, Mr. Bay. Thank you, sir, I said, not entirely certain what I was thanking him for. I walked out of his office slowly down the long, empty corridor to biology. The hallway was lined with posters made by the Basketball Boosters Club with messages like, Go Warriors, sink the Vikings, that sort of thing, rendered in bright poster paints. I got my backpack from my locker, then went to class. My biology teacher, Mr. Polson, a short, balding man with thick eyebrows and a massive comb-over, was in the middle of lecturing and stopped mid-sentence at my entrance. Glad you decided to join us, Mr. Bay. Sorry, I was at the principal's office. Mr. Dahlstrom said to give this to you. I handed him my note. You took the paper without looking at it. Sit down. We're reviewing for tomorrow's test. Every eye in the class followed me as I walked to my desk. I sat in the second row from the back, just behind my best friend Austin. Liz, who is one of the smartest kids in the universe. Austin's name looks European or something, but it isn't. His mother named him because he was born in Austin, Texas. It was his private curse that she had spelled it wrong. I suspected Austin was adopted because I couldn't figure out how someone that smart could come from someone who couldn't even spell the name of the city she lived in. But even if Austin's mom wasn't the brightest crown in the box, I liked her a lot. She spoke with a Texan accent and called everyone honey, which may sound annoying, but it wasn't. She was always nice and kept a supply of red licorice in their pantry because she knew I liked it. My mother didn't buy candy. Austin never got shoved in his locker, probably because he was wider than it. Not that Jack and his friend left him alone. They didn't. In fact, he had suffered the ultimate humiliation from Jack and his friends. He had been pantsed in public. Goodness. How'd it go with Dahlstrom? Austin whispered. Brutal. I shook my head. As I sat down, Taylor Ridley, who sat at the desk to my left, turned and smiled at me. Taylor is a cheerleader and one of the prettiest girls in Meridian. Heck, she's one of the prettiest girls in any high school anywhere in the world. She has a face that could be on the cover of a beauty magazine, long, light brown hair, and big brown eyes the color of maple syrup. Since I'm being completely honest here,
I'll admit, I had a crush on her from the second I saw her. It took me less than a day to realize so did everyone else in Meridian. Taylor was always nice to me. At first I hoped she was nice because she liked me. But really, she's just one of those people who is nice to anyone. Nice or not, it didn't matter. She was way out of my league, like 1,000 miles out of my league. So I never told anyone about my secret crush, not even Austin, who I told everything. Some dreams are just too embarrassing to share. Anyway, whenever Taylor looked at me, my tics go wild. Stress does that to people with Tourette's. I forced myself not to blink as I sat down, pulled my biology book out of my backpack. That's the thing about my tics. If I try real hard, I can delay them, but I can't make them go away. It's like having a bad itch. You can ignore it for a little while, but it's going to build up until you scratch. I've learned tricks to hide my tics, like sometimes I'll drop a pencil on the ground. When I bend down to get it, I'll blink or grimace. Like, crazy. I'm sure the kids around me think I'm really clumsy because sometimes I'll drop my pencil 4 or 5 times in one class. Anyway, between Mr. Dahlstrom and Jack and Taylor, I was blinking like an old neon sign. Polson started up again. Okay, class, we're talking about the electricity in the body. I sing the body electric, said the poem Whitman. Who, pray tell, can explain what role electricity has to play in the body? He panned the room with his dusty glaze, clearly disappointed with a lack of participation. You better know this, people. It's on your test tomorrow. Electricity runs our heart, the girl with massive braces in the front row said. Correct, he said. And what else? Taylor raised her hand. It signals all of our nerves and thoughts. That's right, Miss Ridley. And where does this electricity come from? He looked around the room. Where does this electricity come from? Come on, people. It was dangerous when no one was answering, because that's when we started hunting out those least likely to answer the questions correctly. How about you, Mr. Morris? Batteries? The class laughed. Brilliant, Polson said, shaking his head. Batteries. Okay, Mr. Morris. Perhaps it's time you change your batteries, because clearly they are running down. Where does electricity come from, Mr. Vey? I swallowed. Electrolytes? I said. That would be true, Mr. Vey, if you were an electric eel. Everyone laughed again. Taylor glanced over at me sympathetically. I dropped my pencil on the floor. Austin raised his hand. Mr. Liss, Polson said, enlighten us. Austin straightened himself up in his chair. He was about to deliver a lecture, which he was. The human body generates an electrical current through chemical concentrations in the nerves in a process called bioelectrogenesis. Whenever a nerve signal is sent, potassium ions flood out of the nerve cells and sodium ions flood in. Both of these ions have slightly different charges, so the difference in ionic concentrations inside and outside the nerve cell creates a charge which our bodies process as electricity. Bravo, Mr. Liss. Harvard awaits. For those of you who have no idea what Mr. Liss just said, I'll write it on the board. Bioelectrogenesis. When Mr. Polson's back was turned, Austin turned around and whispered, What happened with Dahlstrom? Did Jack get detention? I shook my head. No, I got detention. His eyebrows rose. For getting shoved in your own locker? Yeah. Dahlstrom's a tool. That I know.
Thank you for tuning in to chapter 2 and 3 of this book that I really like, but for some reason never read.